I call to order the City of Glenwood Springs regular city council meeting. It is January the 4th. And before we get going, welcome everybody and said it earlier, say it again. Happy New Year to everyone. Happy New Year and healthy New Year, and may all your wishes come true. So with that, I will take a roll call, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Dem.
Here.
Councilor Schachter.
Here.
Councilor Kaup.
Here.
Councilor Weimer.
Here.
Councilor Godis.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. Any agenda changes or conflicts before we jump in? I see none. Moving on, item 7 on the agenda, council announcements. All, no, the consent agenda. Also nothing. We'll move on. Then we'll go to our citizens appearing before council for items that are not on the agenda. And I'm going to maintain the decision we made that we will not allow phone calls, only in-person appearances. So if anybody's here, items not on the agenda, please come forward. And I see none. We'll move on. Next is the consent agenda. And entertaining a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
So moved. I think you need to do the microphone. Shelley?
To approve consent agenda, are we removing the item?
It's already been removed.
Okay, it's been removed. So I will move to approve consent agenda as revised.
We have a motion.
Second. We need a mic for that?
Yes, we do.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Motion and a second. Any discussion? What? This is a good time. Councilor Weimer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. As part of the consent agenda, built into there, you'll see 10.d. Tourism Management Board appointments. I do want to just spend a second and call out how thrilled I am to be part of the Tourism Management Board. That just blown away by the quality of people that choose to volunteer their time and spend their energy in helping those discussions along. Specifically tonight, though, I want to congratulate Aaron McAllister and Andy Wallace, who are newly appointed to that council, and then also Justine Smith, Heather Montres Cowan, and Mike Mercatoris, who are re-ups. For some crazy reason, they decided to re-up, and we look forward to working with all of those guys and ladies moving forward.
Thank you. Councilor Godis.
Yeah, I just also want to recognize Leslie Gallagher. I just want to recognize Leslie Gallagher, who's also put forth her volunteer application for the Firefighters Pension Board. So thank you very much, Leslie.
Thank you. And Councilor Kaup, please.
And lastly, I recognize John Hartman. We're appointing him to the.
Microphone, sorry.
Turn it off.
No, I did. There.
Okay, I'd like to recognize John Harmon. We're appointing him to the Housing Commission tonight. John also presently serves on our Transportation Commission, so he's really stepping up and serving the community, and we welcome him to the Housing Commission.
Excellent. Thank you, Councilor Kaup. If there's no more comments, all in favor say aye. Aye. And those opposed? We'll see none. Thank you. Motion carries. Moving on into our action and or presentations for this evening. Item 10 is the tourism promotion contract with the Chamber Resort Association. And I have that's Steve, I think.
Yeah, I can kind of tee this up for you if you want. So each year we go through a process that is the budget process where we allocate resources. We generally hear a quick presentation from the Chamber as one of our contractors, and we did that in August. We then passed the budget. We haven't officially approved their contract, which is what this agenda item is about. So we've in the past sometimes done it on consent, but I had a couple of requests to pull it off just to see if you guys had, any comments or questions about it. And I know that there is some appetite to, kind of revisit some of our larger contracts. So.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Back to council for some sort of direction. Councillor Cow, please.
I just had a question, Steve. I don't remember having a full presentation from the tourism management board or the tourism director, the contractor for that contract on what the marketing strategy is and, how some of the numbers worked out from 2023 marketing. And so have we not seen that? I remember in previous years, typically we'll see that before we approve the contract.
But yeah, we usually handle that sort of in the budget process, and they did present, but really it wasn't very thorough. We have a lot of things to cover. They would be thrilled, I think, though, to have some time, on stage to be able to tell you guys what they're up to and, how it's gone in the past couple of years and whatever. So I'm sure, I don't mean to speak for them, but I think I can, and that they would love to come up and address you guys anytime you ask.
Are we able to, do we need to approve the whole contract tonight, or are we able to approve the first quarter or something like that?
I mean, you could do whatever. I mean, what I will say is that I think, I don't know the rhythm exactly, but I do know that in terms of your media buys, you're probably going to be doing a lot of those. It's not equally partitioned out over the 4 quarters.
Right.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, you could approve a certain amount of funding to go along with the contract or something like that. The contract itself is not really designed to be partially
up,
approved
yeah.
or split up right now. I didn't know that would be a request of council, so.
I'm just curious. I don't know that I'm requesting it. I do understand there's a lot.
Yeah,
of
I mean, I
front-load
think
costs.
that,
Mhm.
yeah, like I said, I wouldn't have any way to, it's absolutely possible, but I think it would take me a little bit of time to think my way through and talk to the contractor about timing and when money is needed for which kinds of things and when media buys go on and that kind of thing that I just don't have the information on.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Weimer, please.
I would move to approve the 2024 tourism promotion contract as it's been presented as part of the annual budget process with the Chamber Resort Association.
Thank you. We have a motion. Councillor Schachter.
I would second motion.
Okay, excellent. Motion and a second. Any discussion? Councillor Godus, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm one of the people that asked that this contract be taken off consent. Mostly because it's, $1.4 million of revenue. And I think their budget's like 1.15-ish that they're proposing. And I think that that's a pretty large amount for us not to contemplate in a thoughtful manner and just have it on a consent agenda. I don't view that as consent worthy. I reading through the contract and these different exhibits, I just got to say, this is not how mountain communities are marketing anymore. I have talked to a lot of communities through my job. I talked to a lot of communities as the president of the Colorado Association of Ski Towns, and resort communities by and large have been discovered. They're not doing heads and beds anymore. They're not doing wraps on trains in Denver and dasher boards and things like that. So the way we're doing marketing, that we've been doing marketing since forever, of getting more and more and more people here, more heads and beds. We have 92% occupancy rate on average, which is the highest in the state. Do we need to get more people here? I mean, at what point is too many? And at what point does that extra $200,000 or $300,000 bring your occupancy rate from 90% to the 92% that we're at right now? I go to other communities, Moab, recreate responsibly, Fruta, recreate like a local. It's much more geared. And this is what the state is doing. I've had state tourism people that say, Glenwood's discovered. Like, if you never marketed Glenwood at all anymore, you would still have the same people coming here. So to see a budget that is reflective of more and more people, more and more heads in beds when we're full, when our beds are full, is just not something that I can support. I asked for this conversation to happen in October, did not. So that we could have this conversation before we pass this budget. And now that we have to pass this budget so that contractors and people's salary can get paid, I think it's a pretty crappy position to have to be in. So I would like to look at this contract. I would like to look at how other communities market or don't market, and what potential other uses there are for those tourism fund dollars within what they've been allocated for. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Schachter, please.
Now, first of all, it's in the budget. If we were to approve the contract tonight, do we have any control over the strategies and marketing going forward for this calendar year? Or is it totally deferred to the marketing firm once we approve the contract?
So I might ask legal to weigh in on that specifically, but there is a 30-day out in this. We give 30 days notice, and if you guys are uncomfortable, you can renegotiate or cancel the contract or whatever you'd like to do.
Anytime during the year, there's a 30-day notice.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we would just have to pay for services rendered and, any buys that have been made up to that date.
Okay.
So certainly, even on an ongoing basis, you guys could evaluate that, and there is that ability to exit if you need to.
And do we have a workshop now scheduled with the tourism director?
Yes, we haven't set the agenda next meeting, but on the
Okay.
18th, I've got on the list of work sessions, this topic.
Good. And I guess, Counselor Godus, one of the key questions to ask at that point would be, what's the risk to that 92% if we don't market? I don't know. That's rhetorical at this point. I mean, I look at Moab and I still see a ton of marketing. I don't care whether you call it responsible or active. I still see a ton of it. So I'd want to see some response to that. So I guess knowing that 30-day out and a workshop in the immediate future, I'm probably comfortable approving the motion at this point,
Thank
with
you.
a lot of questions to be asked at that workshop.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Godus.
Yeah, I think for that workshop on the 18th, and I think I've spoken with Hannah about this, I think it's very important. Again, as I talk to other mountain communities about how much they're spending, communities that are like us,
And
communities that are much bigger than us, communities that have a much larger Breckenridge. I think that is really instructive to benchmark. We shouldn't redesign the wheel necessarily. I think we shouldn't live in a vacuum. And if other communities are spending a third of what we're spending, that's an important data point that we have to consider, because these are public dollars that we're spending. I'll also say, I think, the conversation about this, something that's unexamined is going to, in general, become less effective and efficient over time. And we have not examined this contract or put it out to bid in over a decade. I mean, $1.5 million is a lot of money to not contemplate, not every year, but certainly every third year, every fourth year. We should not go decades in between putting this out to a competitive bid, because those things do not get examined, and then we cannot look back and go, is this how we want to market our community? We're responsible for the marketing of this community, not a designated entity that hasn't been examined in a decade.
Thank you. Counselor Cap.
I think some of the questions that have been answered here, if we do have that 30 days, and, I'm willing to vote to approve this contract tonight, but with the caveat that we do have that work session, my concerns really come into the structure of the Tourism Management Board and how that board is run, and making sure that that board was set up to give independent oversight to our contractor that is given that contract. And I'm not real comfortable that that's the way that board works. So I'm hoping that in that work session, we can address that and look at the structure of that board and how it's really functioning with respect to, us putting out a contract for public bid, and that this is a use of public funds, tax generated funds, and it needs to have oversight by an independent board that acts on behalf of the city and the taxpayers. So I'm okay approving this tonight, but I do look forward to that work session.
Thank you. Councillor Schachter.
No,
please.
thank you. I think, two things. What I'm hearing tonight is maybe it would be helpful for us to email some of these concerns to Steve to then pass on for an agenda for the workshop. I've heard 5, 6 excellent points. That may be helpful for us to look at, say, here are the things we want addressed. We want to control that in that workshop and that agenda. The second thing is what Councilor Goda said, RFP doesn't have to be a threat to a vendor. An RFP can be affirmation. There's a very, not only to our taxpayers, but to the vendor itself that, hey, you are doing the best job. I think that's helpful. A third thing that's, I think it might not be directly related, but indirectly related. I'd like for us to find out from staff, what is that reserve that's been accruing, that 7.5% that's more related to how we spend it rather than the tourism marketing. So it's a tangent to that. So that's another thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think one more time, Councillor Gomes.
I just want to reaffirm Sumner's point of it's not a threat. Just in today's Post-Independent, there was a article about Rifle renewing the contract with Mountain Waste. I believe it's Mountain Waste. And so their contract, by the way, is like within a few percentage points of Glenwood Springs for their single hauler waste. Sorry, I'll be specific. And they've had this for years. And this was the current vendor got the contract again. And it was the city of Rifle saying, hey, you guys have done a good job. And by the way, the only other person that responded was significantly higher. So those kind of things happen more often than they don't. And I would suspect because we do a good job, I think most of the time, the first time getting these things right and having a good RFP process initially, those vendors typically have the kind of relationship that endures. And I would expect that would be something that would be consistent with this as well.
Thank you. Anything else from council? I see nothing. My 2 cents is that I concur with what I heard. Tonight, I agree with you guys. I think it's valuable that we do have a discussion in the next workshop with some of these points that were made tonight, but in light of not disrupting what's going on, I think we should approve this tonight. So I'm in favor of approving it. So with that, I will call the question. Ryan, please.
No, Councillor Godus. Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Dame. Yes, Councillor Weimer. Yes, Councillor Kaup. Yes, Councillor Schachter. It passes 4-1 and a Kleenex.
So,
Thank
Mr. Mayor,
you.
before we move on, could I
Yeah.
just ask, do we have a pretty consistent head nod that I should contact our contractor and ask them to come in and make the presentation that Councillor Kaup has is that how we want to start the next work session?
That's how I understand it, and please chime in, council, but that's how I understand it. And I think from what at least for me, I would like to have as much information and details as possible. I think Sumner, Councillor Schachter said it once, I don't know how you said it, but it's what do you get for dollar on the, like tit for tat? What do you get? Bang for the buck. Is there some way we can figure that out before we
I think
just?
we can email questions to Steve. Sorry.
Okay, but I think I hear you guys saying, yes, please invite our contractor and
Yes.
prepare them for the questions they might get and ask them to do a presentation to start the meeting.
That's how I get
Okay.
it, yes.
Well,
Councillor Cap?
I'm also, and maybe this needs a little more discussion with council, but I would like to see us schedule a work session with our city board of tourism management, independent of the contractor. So just of the board on its own,
But that should not be the same meeting, in my opinion.
not the same meeting.
Okay.
Do you think we'll be ready for it the 1st of February, the next meeting? Play it by ear?
It's up to you. Yeah.
I think it could
I'll
work.
ask the liaison to the board. Do you think that could work?
Thank you. Councillor Godus.
Thank you.
And I don't know if this is a separate work session or if it's the same work session, but I would like to task our staff with finding out how much the budget is and where it goes in communities like Granby, Steamboat Springs, Winter Park, Edwards, Eagle. I'm just hypothetical, communities like ours, because some of these budgets are marketing, but they're spent on special events and big summer events and things like that. So understanding, I'm not going to ask our vendor to go out and find out what everybody else does, but I think our staff knowing what other communities do and how they spend that money, and what that bang for the buck is, what their occupancy rates are in those communities versus what they spend. That's helpful for me to help make a decision on the effectiveness of our marketing. So I don't know if that's the same. I mean, what do you guys think? Is that the same work session or is that a separate work session?
Same.
I think it's the same.
Okay, but maybe two distinctive parts. Like I want to hear a presentation from our
Director.
tourism contractor, and then I also want to hear from our staff that says, here's what's going on in the landscape and with these different things.
For staff and board.
Yeah.
Do you think staff can pull this together? Okay. You said that so much nicer than I did. Thank you. That's exactly what I meant. Very good. I think that was it. That was just comments after the vote. So thank you, guys. Moving on to item 11, tonight's agenda. Planning file 4523, matters of state interest, 1041 permit application and location and extent, Xcel Energy Mitchell Creek line rebuild. And we're gonna start with Hannah,
Maybe.
maybe, and then we'll go from there. Actually, Hannah, just a second before we jump into this, I understand one of our counselors is online. Aaron, would you like to join the meeting? If so, raise your hand. If you just want to listen in, that's fine too. I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing.
I think I'm good just listening in.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Good evening. I was about to say mayor. Mayor Pro Tem and Council, Hannah Klausman, Community Development and Economic Development Director. Tonight we have an interesting project. This is the first time a 1041 matters of state interest application has made it to you guys. This is a new process. So I'm going to do probably a little bit more on the education side. Hopefully you can come up to speed as you have not seen this come before you. This is our new section 7080 that you guys adopted in 2022. These are guidelines and regulations for matters of state interest. They apply to very specific areas of the city and also to very specific activities. The project before you is a electric line rebuild from Xcel, and staff did determine from the applicability section that it does trigger our matters of state interest application. So this has gone before Planning and Zoning Commission and is now before you. It is a combination of the 1041 permit, as we refer to it, as well as the location and extent permit, which is what you're normally used to seeing. But because this has triggered this new section of code, it is a larger application, as I'm sure you noticed in your packet materials. So I hope you guys had a great weekend of reading everything very thoroughly. So this is a simultaneous processing of our location and extent review. And so we're combining them, as I mentioned, and you have obviously your normal realm of approving with conditions or denying the permit, and it will apply to both the location and extent and the 1041. Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed this application at their December meeting and had unanimous recommendation of approval with the conditions as stipulated in the packet for your review tonight. So I'd also like to point out this is a very technical application. I'm going to give you a project summary. Matt Langhorst and Ryan Gordon have heavily been involved in this project for 3 years now, so they are very well adept at this and can answer some of your more technical questions as how this project is actually going to roll out. as well as the applicant who is here with a full team tonight as well. So what we're looking at is a 2.25 mile segment of XL's transmission line, starting at the Glenwood Springs station, which is in North Glenwood there, connecting through to the Mitchell Creek substation on the south side of the river. The line is originally from the 1940s with some work that's been done in the 1960s. And so the need for updating this line is it really has reached the end of its lifeline. Part of this project is replacing and constructing 37 existing poles. In the application, you saw that the pole structures and what they look like and the height, that's a major change of what's happening here. So we have higher pole heights and also a wider 60-foot easement that is necessitated by the new pole structures. I included this in your staff report, also in the application materials, just to give you an idea of the change in pole heights. You can see from this spreadsheet here, 6 poles will either remain the same or have a small reduction. So those are the ones that are outlined in green, if you can see that. And then we have the rest of them that are increasing in height from 2 feet up to 50 feet. So that's in the blue. Existing poles currently vary anywhere from 26 feet in height up to 101 feet in height. And that the new pole heights are obviously shifting upwards, starting at about 55 feet and going up to 101 feet as well. So if you have questions on this, I can answer them, so can the applicant. I also included a diagram of what these new poles are going to look like. This is kind of the major component that you'll probably hear about from this project. Currently, they are wood poles. So this is the new pole diagram, which is a steel monopole design. It is designed to rust and have a rusted look later on in its life. Part of the very long criteria for 1041 application is alternate route consideration. So I did want to speak briefly on what the applicant has already done and already presented to city staff regarding the underground possibility. So I know that's probably a big question. Also the alignment. And the applicant can speak to you in further detail about the specifics of what they did review, but that has gone through a thorough review and they have explanations of why it cannot be underground or partially underground, which was a conversation that came up at Planning and Zoning Commission, as well as why they chose to go with their alignment they have. They did look at alternate routes and have reasoning for why those were not chosen. So the review criteria for this type of project is much larger than we're used to. There's 18 criteria. I've tried to condense them here, and staff went through and analyzed each one of these in your staff report. So staff response to this criteria is in bold. I am going to just go through them with you so that we all are aware of what we're reviewing this project on. So health, welfare, and safety of the residents will be protected and served. Conformance with the comprehensive plan and other adopted plans. The project is financially feasible. The project is not subject to significant risk from natural hazards. The project will not have a significant adverse effect on the capability of local governments to provide infrastructure and services. Will not have a significant adverse effect on the quality or quantity of recreational opportunities and experience. 7 through 12 is a combination. They all say the project will not significantly degrade air quality, surface or groundwater quality, wetlands and riparian areas, plant or animal life, or existing visual quality, nor significantly deteriorate soils and geologic conditions. Continuing, the project will not cause a nuisance. The project will not result in an unreasonable risk of releases of hazardous materials. Urban development, population densities, and site layout and design shall be accomplished in a manner that will prevent pollution of aquifer recharge areas. Project shall be reasonably necessary to meet projected community development and population demands. And the project shall be constructed in areas which will result in the proper utilization of existing facilities. And finally, economic impacts, including but not limited to taxable property, licensed and permitted facilities, and recreation related to the proposed project have been identified and will be compensated or mitigated. That's a long list of things to consider when you're reviewing this project. I'm happy to go over any of staff's analysis on any one of those. But we did find that in our review that the project did meet this criteria. Just a little bit on our comprehensive plan, identifying the goals supported. Obviously, this does promote long-term sustainable economic development. Maintaining Glenwood Springs as a regional tourism, retail, commercial, and governmental center of Garfield County with provision of services. And then I've also listed some policies and actions within our comprehensive plan that support those goals. The referral agency list on this is also fairly extensive. So the applicant was required and did reach out to numerous agencies, including CDOT, Colorado Department of Transportation, the Railroad, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. And we have a stipulation in our conditions that at any time when they receive comments from these agencies, we are notified of those responses. So XL did forward some comments from CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, regarding wildlife habitat, and they did respond with no concern there. They did include a timeline for some of their helicopter operations to avoid key times, which is included. So we are aware of those comments and have incorporated them. We have received some public comments regarding the project, mostly phone calls to the office. People just kind of interested in how it's going to happen, interested in the helicopter operations, things of that nature. Also in our conditions is they have a public information section regarding this project so they can communicate in tandem with us so that people are aware of when helicopters or large poles are moving into the neighborhood and can be apprised of that situation. One letter that was submitted by an HOA and is in your packet, and I believe an HOA representative is here tonight that might speak on that later with a specific request. And staff did review that letter, and staff's response, we do believe that we have a condition written into what we have already that addresses, and it's all public roads within the city right-of-way shall be maintained, and if damaged will need to be replaced or repaired per city standards. That's a fairly standard condition that we attach to most projects. If anything is, basically you need to put it back to the condition that it was once you started. If you guys have questions on that public comment or staff's response, we can certainly go into that further. So staff and Planning and Zoning Commission are recommending approval of the combined location and extent permit and 1041 application for the XL line with suggested conditions and recommended findings on page 7 through 8 of the staff report. I've also included them here. Here is the list of conditions. One of the things that I pointed out in your staff report is staff and XL and our legal team reviewed the conditions after the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting and did make some tweaks. So you have a red line of that, and we can certainly go through. Some things were identified that really weren't applicable to this type of project. It's somewhat unique in that it's not building structures. It really has to do with slightly different. So we did make some changes. Legal has reviewed that and signed off on that with staff and the applicant. So there should be agreement there, but I just wanted to list them here and we can refer back to them if necessary. And with that, I will take your questions. We also have the applicant here and then public comment. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Klausman, for the thorough presentation. Back to council for questions, and we'll start with actually Councillor Godus.
And we have no ability to deny this, correct?
No, you do have the ability to deny. I'm going to defer to legal.
Okay, Carl, we don't have really any grounds to deny this.
We have not found anything based on the criteria presented that would support a finding of denial. Certainly conditioning it to mitigate impacts, absolutely. But from a staff perspective, we didn't see anything that was like a poison pill that would result in us being able to defend a full denial.
So is it safe to say we can ask for consideration for streets, for impacts, for things like that, but we would.
Yeah, I think that are related to the activity, absolutely. And if you go back to this kind of the decision-making box is the, what is it, 12? Different criteria.
Mhm.
So it needs to be reasonably related to one of those criteria.
But if we decided to deny this, would it be your opinion that we would be opening ourselves up legally to challenges?
I would expect you would see a legal challenge to that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think the one thing that I would add to that, and, other staff can reiterate probably better, is we have this ability to review under 1041 and have greater regulatory authority as opposed to a location and extent. So really applying the conditions that we see necessary to facilitate this project efficiently and well for the community. But staff, public works, our electric department are not interested in preventing this necessarily in any way. We do not see the impact to deny us, as Carl mentioned.
Thank you. Councillor Schachter, please.
Thank you. And I remember in the past, I think it was planning and zoning, denied 100-foot tower downtown some years past. Where is this 100-foot tower going to be now? And do we know, do we have, how do we, and I guess related to that, I know it was denied at one point. It was too high. And I think it was near the old power plant. And it was clearly denied as being too high for Glenwood. A lot of these are extremely high. How do you evaluate, without us, drawings don't really help us evaluate the visual impact to the west side of our town. So what criteria do we use other than what Excel says?
Well, your own review of the criteria as listed, we do have visual impacts listed, and staff did provide an analysis. Yes, there is an impact to what will be seen there, but the increase in height from an existing pole standard is what we kind of applied to that in our analysis, that it's getting higher, but it does already exist.
I guess my concern, I don't know if it's shared by council, is in almost every situation, whether it be an apartment, a house, but in this case, poles, once things are built, they end up looking higher than they do on paper. Almost 100% of the time. And I'm a little concerned.
That was a question, right?
Huh? I'm a little concerned about, yes, the question is, evaluating on paper is different than a more in-depth analysis. And I wonder how far we can go with the visual analysis and visual impact on West Glenwood, and particularly where some of these poles are 80 to 100 feet tall. That's a question.
Well,
Go
ahead.
I was just going to say, I think this is a good question for the applicant regarding the location of those poles in particular. I think it's also a good conversation to have with the applicant regarding the reasoning behind the height of the pole relative to safety concerns and things like that they discussed in front of the planning commission. So I think that's a good question for the applicant before we get back to more of a process question.
Okay. And related to the Hill Street, Spring Street issue, I'm a little, help me understand, I think in your document, or you mentioned that part of Excel's responsibility would be to maintain or have the streets affected, restored per city standards versus the current condition. That's a big difference when you're talking about that Hill Street, which is in substandard conditions dramatically, and there's going to be an impact on it. Can we and should we require that they, at least a portion of it, if not all of it, particularly if they're using it to access a right of way, now and in the future, be restored to city standards, or at least better, because they're in pretty bad condition. And I know Excel has paid West Glenwood residents significant money for right of way rights. So where do we stand on that street?
That's a very good point. It does say to city standards, but I think the important piece of that is return to what it was prior to them starting their construction. It's not meant to say you will construct a brand new street to our city standards today, even if it never existed in that manner. So.
And is there room to negotiate with that? Because the road is substandard, it's going to get probably in additional deterioration. Where do we draw that line? Or where do we negotiate with the applicant?
And I might actually lean on either Public Works or Engineering for this discussion. Staff has also been working with this HOA for some time to negotiate that back access area. So currently it's not actually allowed per their development agreement from ages ago. So even if we were to say, hypothetically speaking, like pave this, it's actually not part of the development agreement for that HOA. So we would need to get through that process initially.
Yeah.
And I think I will talk this over to Carl. He's
Yeah.
reaching for the button.
No, I was just going to say that I think a couple of things you need to think about here. One is the damage to the road was not caused by Excel. They went up the road. They had used it, I think, for an emergency pole replacement. It was actively in use. And so the damage to that particular street is not all on this applicant. If we wanted to use that standard, which would be great, Excel would be repaving a significant portion of Glenwood. If the standard was just that they had used it or somebody would like their street repaved. So keeping in mind also, it is our right of way, not the HOA's right of way. And that I believe since, it goes back to pre-COVID days, and Matt probably should come up here and address, or Ryan, this particular street. So keep in mind, it's not a public driveway. If it was, they would have negotiated with Excel separately. It is a public right of way. And we are in the middle of a development review process as to whether or not that is even usable for access to development. So I guess what I'm saying is I would be hesitant, and I think it's a little premature to try to condition this application on fixing a road for an HOA that can't currently use that road for access.
And I guess my only question at this point, even though we would probably never approve that road if it were starting from scratch, it is still a city street, is it not?
No. It's not a city street. It's not ever been approved to a city street level. It is an access that goes to a gate that goes to private property adjacent to that is within a city right of way. The HOA has utilized it for their own access to the rear of their building. They have gravelled out the large open space area and they're utilizing it. They would like it improved.
But it is not a city street.
Not a city street.
Thank you.
We've never determined it to be a city street. It's not on our HUTF as a city street. It is not an improved city street in any way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cap, please.
Hannah, you mentioned the red line findings and conditions. Do we have, is that what's in our packet?
Yes.
Okay, because I don't see red lines, but they've already been edited.
Well, so it's an attachment. The conditions that are in your staff report are as written.
Okay.
The red line, sorry.
Separate attachment.
It's a separate attachment
Okay.
just to show you what was changed between the conditions of Planning and Zoning Commission till today.
Okay, thanks. I see that now. As far as the schedule, did P and Z have any concerns about disruption to the residential neighborhoods along there? I did see that the schedule is, I think it starts in the spring and then most of the construction's over the summer and then there's re-veg and kind of restoration in the fall, late summer, fall. So it's pretty condensed, the construction period, I believe. But it also mentioned a 12-hour operations, I think somewhere. So are we comfortable with?
So
disruption?
Planning and Zoning did discuss several aspects of the timeline, and I think what they focused most on was the helicopter operations. Obviously, that can be disruptive, and so they wanted to make sure that there was ample notifications, that it didn't interact with wildlife. The applicant does have in their materials 12-hour operations. They did state at the Planning and Zoning Commission, it is not the plan to operate for 12 straight hours. It will likely be sections of the day. And they can certainly speak to that timeline a little bit further with you guys. But Planning and Zoning Commission did get to a point where they were comfortable with what was being presented.
Okay, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Yes, Councillor Schachter, please.
Again, it's just come up before. Do we have any process or need or request for bonding in something like this or any other projects where there's considerable disruption or other things that would protect us should something happen that is not covered by the contract?
Yeah, not really in this instance, in the sense that this isn't, I mean, normally we bond underneath a subdivision improvements agreement for public improvements that we will at some point take or own or maintain. And that's not the case here. So the other thing I would say is that they are also fairly tightly regulated from the state level as well. And I think that's a good question to ask the applicant about, you know, how they determine that they have sufficient resources to accomplish the project.
What
that they're-
recourse we have.
Yeah, well, and it's, I guess where I'm thinking about that is certainly underneath this permit, if something weren't done, you know, if they didn't re-veg or something like that, we could enforce like we do underneath any other development permit. But in terms of holding money, no, that's not part of, we don't have a mechanism to do that, nor, I guess it's something we haven't really thought about on this project exactly, as needing to, because we don't own these improvements.
So hypothetically, how would we be able to enforce
Through-
non-compliance with the conditions?
Either through a municipal or state court action to enforce the terms of the permit.
Thank you.
All right.
You did actually make me think of something. I had a conversation with Garfield County planners who are also processing. This is the segment of a larger line. So one thing that actually was mentioned that we did not include in our conditions, and we can open it up for discussion. They have something in regarding applicant following all FAA requirements for helicopter pole delivery. I'm not an FAA specialist myself, and the applicant can certainly speak to what that might entail. But it might also be a condition for consideration, as I'm sure they're already planning on abiding by that, but throwing it in just for clarity.
Excellent, thank you. Any additional questions to staff at this point? I'll see none. Thank you. Would the applicant care to come forward? Present your item. Please state your name for the record.
Okay. We can do difficult. Let's see here. Password protected.
Of course.
Just to make it extra interesting. Uh-oh, and now I have to type it under pressure. Alrighty, if we're ready, I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jennifer Chester. I'm manager of siting and land rights for Excel Energy. In that capacity, I oversee both our land acquisition team and our permitting team that has been putting together all the work on this. I have with me today several team members who may be called upon to answer specific technical questions, and we have some folks online as well. So Hannah had this map in her presentation, so this should look pretty familiar. As mentioned, we're replacing,
Did you share your screen?
oh, nope,
1 second.
details.
Over here.
Perfect, thanks. Looks like this one. Now we're all looking at the same thing, which will be more helpful. So we have the 2.25 mile line between the two substations, Glenwood and Mitchell Creek, that we're replacing. About 2 miles of that is within the city of Glenwood Springs. There are 4 structures, or about 1/4 mile, that are actually in unincorporated Garfield County. As Hannah mentioned, we're processing our location and extent permit with them concurrently at the same time. As also mentioned, the line was originally built in the 1940s. Some of our easements actually go back to earlier than that, 1920s, I think I've seen some, and beforehand. The rebuild at this point follows the existing electric line alignment between those two substations. And as mentioned, we looked at alternatives and evaluated those before we settled on that existing alignment. different version of a very same map here to highlight some of the construction areas along that existing alignment that we'll be utilizing temporarily for the installation of the new line. Those are shown in those yellow boxes. They serve a couple of different functions here. The smaller ones that are immediately adjacent to the line are needed for various construction operations. That includes pulling new wire through the structures once they're installed. The larger areas, I don't know if you can see my cursor, we'll see. The one just east of Traver Trail and one up in the unincorporated Garfield County area are material staging and fly yards that'll be used both for storing materials and then distributing them with the helicopter downline as needed during construction. So the two helicopter yards, one of them located in City of Glenwood Springs, the other is in unincorporated Garfield County. We have a variety of access routes defined as well and depicted on the map, although maybe a little hard to see, but hopefully better in the packet materials and application, are the purple dashed lines. Those have been designated at various points as different types of access. In some cases, it's walk-in only. We'll actually only have crews on foot getting to certain places. So we're gonna have some hiking for our crews on this project. We have others that'll be truck or other equipment delivery or access, as well as some that's limited in between. It'll be like ATV type access only. That's based on the current access, the condition, and us trying to limit disturbance in general for construction that we've defined them that way. The permanent components, as I mentioned, we have the temporary areas are somewhat obvious maybe, but I'll go through them just in case. We have the transmission poles themselves, the new conductor and shield wire and OPGW. Some of the access routes we'll use in the future for operation and maintenance. We've negotiated those rights with the landowners individually. And then at each pole location, in certain instances, there's a small graded area that will remain later. Hannah shared the pole diagrams and mentioned in her presentation, the line is operated at 69 kilovolts today and will continue to be operated at 69 kilovolts in the future. And unless and until it's determined to need to be operated differently. Generally, the poles will be those monopole, which is the single steel pole. There's two exceptions, and that's at the Colorado River crossing. So on the north and south side of the Colorado River, there'll be what we call the H-frame structures, which are the ones on the left side of your screen. Those are keeping the line essentially in its current position as it crosses over the highway and the Colorado River to get to the south side. There's that type of structure there today. It's just wood instead of steel. Each of the pole types that you see here are utilized depending on the condition in which it will be located. Some of that is related to geotech, the terrain between the poles, the location, and the span, the distance between those. There'll be that weathering steel, so they'll appear a rust color or brown over time. And depending on the location, the poles will either be placed on a concrete foundation. That'll generally be at points where the line turns. So instead of being exactly straight, it takes some sort of, has an angle to it. And the remainder will be directly embedded. So we'll drill or dig a hole and then place them in that without that concrete foundation. The majority of the poles will be the one on the right-hand side, highlighted in the yellow box. A comparison to maybe a little different degree or additional degree here is what our existing poles are versus what the new ones will be. So as mentioned, the existing poles are wood. They appear brown. They'll be steel and appear also kind of brown or rust colored. The steel poles comply with updated design standards and provide additional wildfire protection. The current easement, actually now we have wider easements in most places with our land rights, but previously the easement associated with the transmission line was 30 feet wide. At the time of construction, it'll generally be 60 feet down the entire length of the line. The height is discussed, currently ranges from 26 feet to just over 100 feet, with that average being in the 47-foot range. The pole height will increase from that 55-foot height on the low end to, again, just over 101 feet, with the average being about 66 feet. Currently, we utilize mostly ground access for maintenance. We have on occasion needed to use helicopter for emergency replacement activity. We'll be constructing using both ground and helicopter access again, and generally intend to use ground access for ongoing patrol and maintenance of the line, unless helicopters are needed in certain emergency cases. One of the questions we've had a lot on the project is what is needed for vegetation management. As we have analyzed the line, we've determined that vegetation removal will generally be limited and very selective. So our vegetation management crews have surveyed the entire line and identified in what areas they need to trim trees or remove them within the right-of-way. This is an existing line that's been maintained, so vegetation management is not new along the line. That's been an ongoing process for us. That's how we get to kind of that limited vegetation removal at this point in time. Once construction's completed, the right-of-way will be restored. That's come up in a little bit of the conversation this evening. And we're responsible for that restoration in accordance with a variety of permits, not only the work that we do here with the city, but also state stormwater permit requirements. Anywhere that we've identified significant vegetation will need to be removed, namely trees, we're communicating and coordinating that with the landowners individually. So construction access, where we can, we're of course utilizing existing public roads, private access, as negotiated with individual landowners. We do not anticipate a need to improve any public rights of way at this time. If we need to conduct improvements on private property for access, that's being negotiated with those landowners. So I think a lot of folks are very interested in how are we actually going to do this? It's been also mentioned tonight, we've been talking about this for a number of years, and that's because this is not an easy project to do. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of consideration and conversation, and we've worked extensively with Garfield County and the city to talk about and develop our construction plan to get to this point. So we have those temporary construction areas or temporary construction easements that I mentioned. That allows us to work outside of the right-of-way that we'll maintain as a permanent land right during construction, and then that is given back to the landowners. We have the 2 TCEs that'll be used for fly yards that I mentioned. We will, in limited cases, be utilizing cranes to lift pole sections into place. You see that activity on the right. That's a fairly large pole, much larger than what we're talking about here. It just happens to be a good picture. It's also a very large crane. But we'll transport pole sections where we are setting them by crane, and then they'll be lifted into place. The poles come in 2 sections generally. The majority of this line will be constructed using helicopters to set that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. Once we pour the foundations where those are needed, we will then set the poles, as you see here, and then we will pull wire between those poles. Our last activity is restoration. Also in the mix in there is removal of the existing poles and line. The 2 pictures on the right-hand side here are examples of the types of helicopter that will be utilized during construction. Generally, we utilize helicopters in areas where the terrain is steep or we have limited access, because that allows us to move things in quickly, conduct the construction, and get out of the area fast. That limits the length of construction, the length of disturbance to an area, and also limits the need for us to cut in roads up hillsides or in geohazard areas or areas that would be less stable. Our use of the helicopters is regulated by the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA here. We've applied for our plan, our permit with the FAA in December, and we're awaiting word back from them on that. The FAA does restrict how and where and when we can fly over buildings, roads, and things here like the gondola as well. We currently don't anticipate any interruption to electrical service. We're able to feed in different ways to minimize that impact. And then, as mentioned, we do expect that we may have need for limited evacuations around helicopter operations as we move down the line. We've put a lot of effort into streamlining our helicopter construction plan for this project. What started out as a much longer duration of use has become very limited at this point. We anticipate roughly at this point 60 days of construction. And in those 60 days, we're anticipating potentially what we have on the schedule right now would be 9 days of helicopter use over those 60 days. As we head towards construction of the project, we have created and are updating with our latest plan a construction communication document that outlines details about how we will communicate with the community, the county, landowners, homeowners, and businesses surrounding the area that we're working in, and how community members can reach us if they have questions or concerns during our operation. So our current construction schedule has us hopefully starting this spring, assuming all permits are in hand, beginning that work, and then finishing in summer. So fairly quick for 2 miles to put in those new poles and remove the existing line. We anticipate having that line in service this summer and completing our restoration summer heading into fall. We would like to work a 12-hour shift or have the ability to do that, essentially during daylight hours. For example, we don't fly our helicopter at night, so we're not hovering over the community with searchlights on. So that 12-hour day our activities will be dependent on the daylight time. We generally anticipate about 30, maybe up to 40 construction workers or crew on site during construction. Not all of those crew members will be in one place at one time. They'll be working in different locations as the construction phasing occurs. They may be in a fly yard or materials yard working on getting that ready for the next helicopter lift. They could be working at digging at poles. Many of these poles will be hand dug in areas where we would typically drive a crane and a drill rig up to an area. We don't have the ability to do this, so they'll be digging with essentially air compressors by hand. A lot of work, but hopefully the plan and the goal of our plan was to minimize impact to the community, but also and part of minimizing that impact is to do it as quickly as we can, as safely as we can. Hannah touched on the criteria here, so no need for me to review that with you all on these next 2 slides, and happy to take any questions you would have for me at this point in time, and I'll flip back to slides if needed, so we can look at any visuals.
All right, thank you very much. Back to council for questions. Councilor Weimer, please.
I'll start us off. Thank you. Couple of questions. So I think you almost answered my first question there at the very end, where you were talking about air compressors, hand digging, like, good Lord, but that's a different topic, different conversation. Just with the geology, the vertical nature, right, of a lot of that 2.5 miles. And I know you've done the study, but can you just talk a little bit about, geologic disruptions and disturbances? Is there potential, especially at the very east end, to disrupt, the geothermal, situation that's going on over there? And then when there's enough, you're the expert here, but when you guys do the switch from old to new, what's that power disruption look like? And we have a fire station over there. We have some other sort of critical infrastructure, things happening. not happening, but just other critical things over there. What's that switchover look like? And can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I happen to see out of the corner of my eye that Josh looks like he came on camera. He is our transmission engineer, so I think he might want to answer those questions.
Cool. And then before that, the geology thing.
And he'll touch on both of those, I think.
Okay.
Yep. Hello, I'm Josh Peterson, engineer with Excel Energy. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so for the geology, during our pre-engineering, we do soil borings on the vast majority of our projects. On this project, we did perform the soil borings at 40 feet deep along the transmission line, including the area on the east side adjacent to the Glenwood Hot Springs. And so we were trying to plan initially for any artesian conditions with our geotech contractor. And so we were ready with hollow stem auger boring and being able to plug that boring with grout in case there were any artesian conditions from the hot springs there. And then we also had a local water resources engineering firm on site watching us perform those soil borings by the hot springs. And what we were looking for was that travertine layer that the hot springs are in. And what we found on the east side was just shale, which is like clay mud rock on the east side with those 40-foot borings. And then moving west from there, it was kind of weak rock along that hillside, weak sandy rock. And then so just to compare those 40-foot borings that we're seeing, our foundations, the concrete piers that Jen was talking about, those ones are going to be up to 26 feet deep. And those directly embedded structures that you just dig the hole and set the structure in it with some backfill, those are going to be up to 14.5 feet deep. So you compare those two depths relative to that 40-foot, those 40-foot soil borings we did along the alignment. You can see that we covered our geotech parameters along the route. Do you have any follow-up questions to that one?
No, thank you. I
Okay.
don't.
And I think the other question was about disruption in service when we switch over from old to new line.
Right.
Yeah, that's normal course of business for us to just open the breakers during our whole construction process to rebuild the line, feed both substations from either side. And then once the line is completed, we'll do our phasing checks and check material along the line, and then just enact the breaker again and set the line back into service.
So is it that you run the entire new line, switch over, and then remove the old line?
We'll have the line out of service while we're rebuilding this line, this section of line. The substations on either end won't be out of service. They'll be fed from other adjacent lines. So the entire existing line will be out of service as we're rebuilding it, and then essentially put the switch back on once we make those connections with the new line back in the old positions.
What will the typical homeowner or business owner see as far as a disruption?
I don't believe there's any effect on distribution coming out of
Okay.
each substation.
So they'll not even notice, the lights are off or anything like that.
Correct.
Okay. Good, thanks. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you. Councillor Cow, please.
Hi, thanks for the information. I had a question on the 60-foot. So you're going to a 60-foot easement along the whole corridor of this line. Do you need to remove vegetation in that whole 60 feet, or how does that work as far as?
Yeah, so if we think about vegetation as maybe a couple of different things, right?
Mhm.
Things that are tall grasses, that sort of thing, shrubs that are small, no, not necessarily. There will be vegetation that gets disturbed or removed during construction where we're operating vehicles. But generally speaking, during the operation of the line, lower vegetation can remain. I think what people tend to be most concerned about are really trees, right? Taller vegetation. Within that 60-foot right of way, generally, trees are not allowed. Tall trees in particular are not allowed.
Okay. Do you have any idea of how many tall trees will be taken out along that 60-foot you know,
Not-
the full 2.5 miles?
Yeah, not
stretch?
many.
Okay.
I don't have the map in front of me. I can get the answer, but it's very specific. So when our vegetation crews went out, they went to each property along the line and looked at what would be within that right of way. So they identified very specific, an elm here or an ash over here or one of those. I think it's less than a dozen.
Okay, and if those are on private property, then you work with the property owner or?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's communicated with the landowner.
Okay. And then as far as re-veg, I think you showed some of that, but, so revegetation, is it planting actually, or do you hydro spray kind of seed just to keep, from getting thistles in and that noxious weeds?
Yeah, it's per the conditions and the restoration plan that's in our stormwater management plan that we get with the state. That plan not only requires us to restore, it holds us to a standard before we can consider the restoration successful or complete in there. And so I think as we move forward with that and evaluate the restoration, some of that will just depend on what are the actual conditions at the time that we complete construction. Is it a wet year? Is it a dry year? Is it
Right,
somewhere in between?
right.
What makes sense to help reseed and restore?
Okay, and then, so my last question was on the, and thank you guys, you have some visual simulations in there that were really helpful to try to see the height of some of these poles, and the ones that are the view from east of Traver Trail. You look at the existing, and then when you look at the view with the lines rebuilt, there are some poles in there that are significantly downhill of the existing homes, but incredibly tall. I mean, it's a little bit shocking of the view line that will be obstructed from some of the whole homes that are existing on the hillside. So how have are those property owners aware of that impact, or if they're not directly on the easement, the 60-foot easement, or how does that work as far as our public outreach and
Sure.
kind of thing? 'Cause I would imagine we're gonna get some outcry on this.
Yeah, we've done several things to share that information with a broader community and take any questions or comments or concerns that come our way. I'll let Josh, if we need, talk about the technical reason that the poles are the height that they are. But just to kind of highlight a couple of details in the table that Hannah had in her presentation. I know when we see, for example, a top end number as being over 100 feet, that feels quite shocking. We do have an existing pole that is that tall. It's on the very east end of the line.
Right.
And it's essentially that same pole that will remain in that height range. So there's only one that's that tall. There's only one pole that's proposed to be in the 90-foot range, 2 poles in the 80-foot range, 5 poles in the 70-foot range. So that top end of our height is a very few number of poles, with the remainder being in the 50 to 60-foot range. That being said, yes, there absolutely is a change in height. And that has to do with the configuration of the existing line, again, built in the 1940s to those design standards,
Right.
and current design standards being what they are today, requiring that height differential. In terms of our public outreach, we began public outreach on this several years ago. We held a virtual public meeting. We sent postcards to nearly 2,000 folks along the line and within a certain distance. Basically, if the line went through a neighborhood, we sent postcards to the entire neighborhood to invite them to join that virtual meeting. So we did a virtual meeting. At that time, we shared those simulations on screen. We actually spent a lot of the virtual meeting talking about it. And we did that virtual because it was during COVID.
Okay.
And we had some folks attend, but not a large number. We then recently in December held a public open house here as well in person. Noticed again around 2,000 folks sent postcards out and asked folks to come visit with us and bring questions forward. We provided comment forms during that open house, and we've made information available on our website for the last number of years. And to this point, we've received very few questions or comments.
Right.
So
I think
I'm
that
sure once
might
the
speak to the awareness that's out there, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've conducted the outreach to try and make folks aware. We have requirements, for example, to post signs for hearings and those sorts of things. So there's lots
Right.
of places. We've maintained that website now for a number of years. We have a hotline and an email where folks can reach out to us as well.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, and I think I have an understanding of why the poles appear so high, for a lot of places, they're sitting on top of those kind of ridge lines that come down from the north. So, I can get that. I just say that in some of these actual visual simulations, I was a little bit shocked by the appearance of the height of some of the poles, so, not sure where I go with that, but thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And who's next? Councillor Schachter, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Couple questions. What do you mean by limited evacuation, and how and when does that occur, and who does it impact?
So the FAA regulates, as mentioned, our helicopter use, and there are requirements that they will impose on us during the helicopter operation about flying over or within proximity to occupied buildings, which would, in our case, most typically be homes in the 2.25 miles that we're talking about. The safe zone for that helicopter operation requires them to fly at a certain height, but also maintain that safe zone horizontally out. So typically, and we're waiting for the FAA to give us the final requirements, we have a 300-foot-ish horizontal zone on either side of the helicopter as it moves down the line. And so what that means is if we have a home within 300 feet, and we do have a couple of instances of that when the helicopter is moving downline with a load underneath, which is going to be the pole sections primarily in this case, we'll have to evacuate that home while the helicopter moves over.
So there are a lot of homes in that area, and 300 feet is a pretty wide swath throughout West Glenwood. I'm a homeowner, what happens? Okay, your FAA says you have to tell us to evacuate. What does that really mean to me?
Yeah, so once we get those final requirements from the FAA, we'll be better able to refine our communication plan during construction and coordination with landowners on what that would look like. In some cases, it's a few minutes of time that helicopter is moving by that particular home. In other cases, it may be a longer duration. So we're working with landowners to communicate about that and understand what questions, concerns, needs they might have as we refine the construction plan and get that information from the FAA.
And is that enforceable?
The
Evacuation, yes.
in
So,
terms of as a requirement,
yeah.
I believe the FAA will make that a requirement. That
Oh, is it if I'm a homeowner, or I have a young baby, or I have an old parent in my home, can you enforce that evacuation? Or is that you're doing your end, you're saying you need to evacuate, but is it voluntary on my part?
I'm not sure that I can answer that question specifically. I don't know if Josh has knowledge on that, but I believe it's enforceable. It wouldn't necessarily be something I individually would enforce, but we would likely work with local law enforcement and others as necessary if we had to take those steps.
And do you have any idea at this point? I know you don't know the exact timing, but how many homes will be affected by that evacuation process?
Yeah, without having the final buffer distance from the FAA, I can't speak to that exactly. But what I, can explain maybe that might help a little bit, I hope, in understanding is that there will be generally three phases throughout construction where we'll use a helicopter. On the very beginning, we'll be delivering things like air compressors to certain structures. In the middle, we'll be bringing in the pole sections. And at the very end, we'll use the helicopter for our stringing operation. And so those, number of days, the small number of days I mentioned, are not consecutive. They're throughout construction as we're staging that. And it's limited to where the helicopter is flying from and to. So I mentioned we have those 2 fly yards that we'll use. So depending on which fly yard we're using and which direction we're going, that will be the areas that may have those potential evacuations. So
How do you notify the evacuation? What kind of notification to the individual homeowners? How do you do that?
yeah, it's a lot of communication and coordination all the way around. So we have construction crew members that'll be working with us very regularly to communicate with the city and the county. We are evaluating the potential use of our email list, our website, lighted message boards, you know, if we're permitted to do so by the city, to let folks know well in advance of helicopter operations. And then those that would be in that evacuation zone, we'll be working very closely with them on notifications and, again, understanding if they have questions or concerns. We're considering setting up community locations. So if folks need to be out of their home for a little bit of time, you know, maybe they can come visit us in the community center, get questions answered, have Wi-Fi, you know, whatever that might be. So we're still working through the final details on that, but the intent is not to knock on anyone's door and have that be the first time they know and that we're asking them to leave. We
So-
anticipate communicating with folks weeks in advance and then on an ongoing basis.
Let's assume, not judging whether this is approved or not, is it fair to say that during the estimated 9 days of helicopter work for the people in North Glenwood, there's potentially considerable disruption?
Yeah, I don't think that we can, I don't think I could say we can do this construction without any disruption. We're just trying to minimize that as much as possible.
Thank you. What impacts, most of it's off Highway 6 and it's not a huge commuting route, but what are the likely traffic impacts? Will all the construction crews, the construction workers, the trucks, et cetera, what do we know about that?
Yeah, so we included information in our application that talked about that. We don't anticipate great traffic impacts. There will be some cases, for example, when we work over I-70, you know, we're coordinating and have to permit that activity with CDOT to understand what their requirements are going to be for traffic control on I-70. In a couple of cases, as the helicopter flies over a road, for example, we'll just use Traver Trail as the example at the moment. And is it Traver Trail? I've heard both, Traver Trail. And as the helicopter approaches, we'll work with the city to have in place traffic control plans to stop traffic momentarily to let the helicopter fly over and then release that.
Does the city have to do that, or do you contract with traffic control people?
Oh, we would contract that out, but coordinate with the city as required for permitting.
The last question, I know some people are concerned with electromagnetic issues and noise of power lines. I understand, and I'm not too technical on this, I understand the voltage passing through these lines is not going to significantly change at this point. And I know you have people studying the safety of it, but are those people third-party neutral, or are they utility Excel people that say, hey, there's no issue with this in terms of noise or health effects?
Yeah, there are a lot of studies that have been done by various entities on health and safety effects, and I could provide links and you can Google and you'll find a lot of different information about that says one thing or another. National organizations, National Health Institute of Safety, I think NHIS, has a pretty robust document and study about that. Doesn't necessarily find that there are related health effects. As part of our 1041 application, we did have to provide study information, which is studies that we contracted to supply for the application. But in the state of Colorado, the PUC also sets reasonableness standards for noise and EMF as well. And all of our facilities are designed to be well within that or even below the limits set forth by the PUC. On the technical end, I see Josh is back on camera again. Josh may want to add anything that I missed or correct me if I misstated something.
You nailed it. I was just going to mention the state requirements for noise and EMF. We're well below both of them. This is a low voltage line. Typically, double or triple this voltage level for a line is where you actually get those requirements to be within a realm that you have to mitigate. But this level of voltage is much smaller than that. And so we provided the calculations to show and back that up. That's typical for any 69 kV to up to 150 kV line.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, if I see no more questions from council, thank you very much for your presentation. I would invite the public, open to public portion of this hearing. If anybody's here to speak, please come up front. State your name and whether you live in a city or not, for the record.
Howdy, James Tanazi, 300 Greenway Drive.
Thank you.
I think this project is going to affect me, I think probably more than anyone else in the city. The existing pole is approximately 30 feet from my property line at this point to the south. This is the first time I've seen pole heights, and I believe it's going to be a 40% increase from 30 to 50 feet. So you might even be seeing this pole over my roof line, which was exhaustively measured when I pulled the building permit for the house. I don't see why this line, it seems lazy and unimaginative, why they can't cross. They're crossing, it's going through a residential zone. Yeah, it was built in the 1940s, and now it's going through a drastically redeveloped portion of town that it's not taken in any account, previous or future growth in West Glenwood. Why it can't cross at before the adventure park and get into the industrial section and wind up where it needs to wind up over there at Mitchell Creek or whatever they're calling that substation. So it just seems like it crossed the river a lot sooner, because North Glenwood is going above all those people. In West Glenwood, particularly me, it's crossing right in front of my house. You know, I hate to be NIMBY, but it's not in my front yard, you know? So anyhow, it just is a tremendous nuisance. I don't think, you know, that was brought up in the presentation by Hannah. It just seems like, yeah, we'll just slap it down here because we have this existing easement. I can't imagine it'd be that much more expensive to go underground down the median of I-70 when they're got helicopters and all sorts of stuff flying around, dropping these poles in. So that's my 2 cents. It seems like it's a done deal. There's already been surveyors out. I'm seeing where the pole's gonna go. I'm seeing where they're gonna run cable bracing back to support this pole, because I think it's a turn in the bend or something like that. So, you know, I'm sure, you know, maybe I could have gotten on this sooner, but it just seems like it's a fait accompli, and it sucks, but you know, that's life. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the public like to come forward? Please state your name and whether you live in the city or not.
Hello, my name is Tyler Benton. I live at 503 Spring Street in Glenwood,
Thank you.
and I'm here in Benton. So Hill Street, as Matt mentioned, is a public right-of-way. That's not a private drive of our HOA. It's used by some neighboring property owners as well. And on the city website, it is there are documents that list it as or designated as a local street. Excel has used this as an access point for their existing line. I've owned it there since 2010. From time to time, see trucks. And as was mentioned, there's a pole replacement where heavy trucks were brought through. And that has happened in the past and will continue to happen into the future. And that's our concern with Excel utilizing this right away. The HOA itself, as Matt mentioned, we do not have a parking for back behind there based on our original designation through the approval of the townhome complex. However, we do have the documents do allow for building maintenance. We have been working with the city to amend that plat. We appreciate and are grateful to the city staff for helping us work through that to allow for parking in the future. Hill Street was paved, and of course, with that steep grade, it was not to city standards, nor are we asking for that. And we were respectfully requesting, the city to negotiate perhaps an upfront fee to help for improvements for their access for what has been and will continue to occur. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody else from the public like to come forward? See none, we'll close the public portion. I'll bring it back to council for a motion. Councilor Godus.
I move we approve planning file number 45-23 matters of state interest, 1041 permit application and location and extent Excel Energy Mitchell Creek line rebuild with the conditions on page and recommendations on page 7 and 8 of the staff report.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve.
This is where someone says second.
Somebody has to say second.
I'll second it.
Councilor Weimer, thank you for the second. Okay, motion is second to approve. Any discussion? Councilor Schacht.
Well, I don't know that we have a lot of choice on this, but I'm going to express a concern that, we are, yes, it's one of the oldest electric systems in the country. The lines have been there forever. But I feel like we're getting kind of the short end in that it would be extremely expensive to reroute this right away, perhaps north of all of our building. I don't know that it's impossible, or if, like Mr. Tanazi said, underground. But I just wonder if another city would have to face the same amount of disruption and the same increase in poles that we have to without us being part of the process way earlier in this process. So I'm very uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable with the pole height. I'm uncomfortable with the process. That doesn't mean I won't approve the motion because I don't know that we have a choice, but I don't like being in this position. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe before we move on quick, before we move on, maybe legal could just explain what location and extent actually means.
Well, so you have two things going on. One is location and extent, which is you really don't have, any choice on. 1041, you have a lot more latitude. That's why we adopted the 1041 regulations. And that's why you see the condition lists that you do, from, I think, and either, I don't know if Matt wants to speak to or Hannah wants to speak to sort of our investigation of undergrounding as a potential option or not in this instance. I think it would also be important to have Matt speak to the public benefit, which is something we didn't really hear about. And I actually am going to drag Matt up here to talk about it because he did share that with the Planning Commission. And I think in the context of this application, it is important, even though we've kind of, you guys are in the middle of a motion. I think it's important for you to hear that.
Thank you. Matt.
If you really want to go back to the cost for undergrounding it, I'm sure we could bring the applicant back up when we had that conversation, but there's a level of cost associated with this that they have to go back to FERC and FERC has to say, yes, that's okay, or the PUC, and they'd have to pass those costs on to the ratepayers, which isn't going to happen, or they pass those costs on to us. So they'll pay for what they're going to pay for. Once it hits a certain amount, it'll go to the ratepayers, which won't be approved, or it'll go to the city. So undergrounding, it can be 4 times to 10 times, depending on who you ask for the cost, which will push it into that analysis. So it's going to be an overhead line, most likely at this point. Number 2, there's so many benefits to this. Yes, the poles suck. I'll be able to see them from my house. You'll be able to see them from different locations. but they meet the requirements for the 69, the 115, fire resistance. You know, we want to get these lines farther apart from each other. There's all kinds of benefits for it. Plus, when you see, I'm not throwing them under the bus or anything, but when you see power go out in the city of Glenwood Springs, a lot of time that's because of transmission issues. They're trying to resolve those issues from Ute, which is in Rifle, all the way to Shoshone, which is a long run. So they're able to take this entire line out because they can feed us from Rifle all the way to Cardinal and Mitchell, and they can feed the Glenwood North, they're calling it Glenwood, we call it North Glenwood substation, from Shoshone or from Hopkins. So they can literally kill that entire line, as Councilor Weimer was asking about, and it won't really affect anybody because they're powering all of our substations still. So at the end of the day, we've planned for all of our substations to either be 69 or 115 kV. So we've planned for this upgrade for many years. When I took this job and Excel came in, I make this joke every single time. Robin Milliard was still here and he's like, well, they've been talking about it for 40 years. Eventually it has to happen. And now that we're having more and more issues with wildfires, these poles will be more resistant to that. They'll be more resistant to sparks, and they'll just function better. And we need them to function better because we like power, and it kind of has to keep going through town. And they're their only choice. They have to upgrade these transmission lines.
Thank you, Matt.
Yep.
Councilor Cap.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that, and had a feeling that underground would cost a lot just with the terrain and everything that we have around here. But that said, you know, when I look along the route that you've kind of laid out in detail in the figures in our packet that show they show the topography, and they also show the kind of Google Earth of the route. There's a handful of homes that are directly affected very intensely, you know, with going from a 30-foot high wooden pole to a 60-foot or more high metal pole with tie downs and everything else around it. Is Excel on the hook? Is there anything to compensate that homeowner
Yeah,
for
and I was going to say, I meant to
protection
mention
of
that
their-
earlier in the hearing. So over the last probably 3 years, at least 3 years, Excel has been negotiating with individual homeowners. You know, every time that line crosses private property, they have been negotiating with those. I think they have most of those resolved now. So those are private negotiations over the impact of that easement if it does touch your property. I think it hit 2 or maybe 3 former mayors going through town at
Okay.
one point. Yeah, up on there. So, and I know, I mean, just, you know, by way of example, I know that our firm has represented 2 or 3 homeowners along the way, just who have asked for assistance in negotiation and things like that. So from a private standpoint, I don't know if Mr. Tanazi is within that easement or not.
Okay.
That's something I just don't know when he was describing that. But as to if you were in that 60 feet, if you're in that 60-foot easement, Excel is going to have to acquire either by negotiation or by use of eminent domain the right to use that space.
Okay.
So same process we would have to go through as the city to acquire property, appraisals, fair market value. There's a court process if you want to push it to that level.
So there will be compensation.
There is
And I guess
compensation.
I'm also thinking of if you have, say, you're not right affected by the 60-foot easement, your property is not hit by that directly. But 200 feet down the hill, all of a sudden the power pole that was 30 feet high is now 70 feet high, and it's right in your view line. Your property value just dropped. I
Yeah,
don't know how much,
that,
but
that's outside the scope. And I suppose that individual, I mean, from my standpoint, that's an individual property owner's claim. It's not, we don't have something in front of us to be able to act on in that regard for that property owner.
okay. I'm just trying to look
Yeah,
out for
no,
community
and I
members.
understand. I mean, this has been a topic of discussion a lot at the staff level.
Right.
So you have those that are directly compensated. I think that to the extent there are other impacted property owners, I think they're going to have to assert whatever rights they have in, that view plane issue or that diminution in value or whatever it is. It's not based on your decision here, whether or not they do or don't have a claim that
Okay.
would be recognized by a court.
So it doesn't negate that. or
It doesn't
anything.
negate that. I mean, you are, you're approving this, I think, you know, in terms of alignment, in terms of the factors, those 12 factors of how it's impacted. Certainly, you know, it would be a factor in some kind of a private suit.
Mhm.
I'll be really honest with you, it's not a winner for a property owner, any more than it is if somebody builds a house next to you and impacts your view plane, right?
Right.
I mean,
Mhm.
it's a little bit of the same thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? No, I see none. I'll give my 2 cents. I completely understand location and extent. I was first faced with that when the new high school was built, and that was quite a while ago, but who in the world builds a high school right on the highway? But we had no say. This is the exact same thing. We have absolutely no say when it comes to location and extent, unfortunately. But I am disappointed that we're not burying these lines. This is 2024. This is the future. These lines will be there for a long time. I think it's well worth the investment to bury them. Like half the world does. We really bury, I mean, electric lines need to be buried. They don't need to be strung overhead anymore. But with that, I'll call for the question.
It's unanimous. It passes.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. Thank you, Excel. Thanks for coming forward. Thank you, Hannah. We're moving on to item 12 in the agenda, ordinance 2024-01, code amendment to title 070, establishing stormwater fee in lieu. I assume that's Mr. Gordon.
Good Lord. Okay. That's all right. All right. Yeah. Good. You guys ready?
Please.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Ryan Gordon, city engineer. So the first, we have two stormwater topics that are first the ordinance and then the update the chapter 4 stormwater. They're somewhat tied together, but obviously separate issues. So first one in front of you is the ordinance to establish a fee in lieu for stormwater detention. Now this is come in front of you guys approximately about a month ago. Since then, we have taken it to P&Z, who has provided their blessing on the fee. So we're coming back to you for first reading and contemplation. I can provide the presentation I did last time. It's again very similar to what it was. I don't necessarily think you need it. So I'm going to leave it open very briefly. My discussion right now, very briefly, for you guys to ask any questions to clarify anything with regards to the stormwater fee in lieu process.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Back to council for questions. Okay, I'll take Shelley. No, that's later. That's later. All right, Councilor Cap, please.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. I was just trying to have clarity on which types of projects would be allowed to use fee in lieu. It looks like it's anything that's 1,000 square feet or less, maybe, but.
So really any project could be applicable or apply for the stormwater fee in lieu. Not all projects could be granted. They still have to come through the engineering department for review and analysis. And if we find that that project is not a good fit for a fee in lieu, then it would not. Really, the threshold is so back up. Any project that comes through the city that requires a grading permit. So this is disturbing more than 200 square foot of land or adding impervious areas does require to meet our stormwater standards, and therefore could either go into the fee in lieu process, which is simply you write a check based on the calculations we've developed, or you go the alternative route, which is go through the stormwater analysis, typically hiring a consultant and going through the design process. So again, it's really any project could utilize this methodology if they would like.
So even a large project, like I think you use the Safeway, say, just as an example of maybe a redevelopment project. That site is almost completely paved at this point and impervious. So if they go in for a redevelopment, would a project of that scale be able to do fee in lieu also?
So that's one of the items within the next discussion on chapter 4, which
Okay.
I'll talk, but it's also applicable
Oh,
here.
sure.
So no, I think it's worthwhile to talk here, and we can just briefly touch on it later.
Okay.
So the short answer is a property like Safeway would be eligible. Now, I want to make a distinction. This is fee in lieu for detention and not for water quality.
Okay.
So they would still be required to do water quality. In the next section, I'll show you a table of where we determine when you come into the system and when you have to provide stormwater detention or water quality. You made a very good point that if Safeway came in and said, look, we're going to redevelop the whole thing, whether it's taking up asphalt and concrete in the building and then basically create no new impervious, by the letter of the law, they wouldn't have to do anything stormwater, because our standards say it's based on the amount of impervious area that you create based on the previous conditions. So Safeway has a lot of impervious. So
Okay.
we have a trigger mechanism that those buildings, those sites, Safeway, for example, or even a building downtown that's 100% impervious, there are triggers where we want them to be in the system, so to speak, to provide some amount of stormwater detention or quality or treatment.
Okay, and is that so that was the only other question I had was, it looked like some of this kicks in when you're doing just an interior remodel. And so I kind of had a question around that is, why does an interior remodel?
Right.
need
Yeah.
to deal with
And
this?
again, this bleeds into the next section, but is applicable for this discussion. So really, stormwater treatment has not been, let's say, something that we've contemplated, quite frankly, ever, right? It's something that stormwater, rain drops on your roof or your shed or your driveway, goes into pipes and disappears,
Mhm.
right? We need to do something with that. And really the trigger is going to be an MS4 permit, which is a state permit that regulates stormwater quality. And so the trigger to enforce or ask for stormwater treatment for a remodel is not solely, but is driven largely by the areas that already are 100% impervious, the downtown areas where we want to have people to contribute to the stormwater, quality and protection and treatment. And therefore, those businesses have never been asked before to provide any stormwater quality or treatment. And therefore, that's the way we're going to get them into the system to participate in treating stormwater.
Okay, so typically they would be doing a fee in lieu. So if the lot is almost 100% covered, they really don't have anywhere to do stormwater.
Right, that's correct, right? We see some of the other historical areas in downtown that have limited site constraints, and therefore they'd put a big deep hole in their front yard or a complicated dry well system. So we're trying to avoid those complicated systems. And two other points, when anybody puts in any of these stormwater detention facilities, we require a maintenance agreement with the city that obligates that homeowner or property to maintain that detention.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, we are ultimately the city's ultimately responsible for the adherence to the MS4 permit, which we haven't got, quite frankly, but it's on the horizon.
Uh-huh.
And so we would have to track back up the drainage system to find who maybe is the culprit and then get them to clean up their mess. And so our idea with the fee in lieu is to be able to start to move towards a more centralized area, regionally based detention system where we can construct, maintain, and operate these detention facilities and not have to rely upon the dispersed systems throughout. And last thing I want to mention is this is not a obligated fee. You as an applicant are in no obligation to pay this. This is an option for you to avoid going through the effort of hiring a consultant, doing the calculations, doing the design. We're giving a very easy way of someone to say, look, I know I need stormwater. I'm going to pay this fee and not have to worry about the detention aspect of stormwater.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great.
Thank you. Councilor Schachter, please.
Thank you, Ryan. I'll ask you a hypothetical that may be very personal. I heard you mention 200 square feet of disturbance triggers this, so replacing the necessity to replace a domestic water line from the curb stop to the house. It's been existing for years. None of it's non-impervious. It's all ground. What happens to a homeowner there when it's going to be 200 or more square feet of disturbance to put that line, redo that line?
Yeah, I really need to clarify where the trigger is for the stormwater requirement is when you are creating impervious area.
Okay.
And not impervious. So to your example, if you're digging up a lateral and it's creating, and you're more than 200 square feet of disturbance, that does not trigger a stormwater treatment requirement. That would trigger a grading permit.
Grading permit.
But it does not require you as the homeowner to pay into the system.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No, we'll see none. Thank you, Ryan. This is an ordinance, so anybody from the public like to come forward? Speak on this? See none, we'll close the public portion. I'll bring it back to council for a motion in ordinance 2024-01. Looks like Councillor Godas is up.
I motion to approve ordinance 2024-01 code amendment to title 070 establishing a stormwater fee in lieu.
Thank you. And second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Motion and a second. Any more discussion? See none, I'll call for the question.
It passes unanimous.
Thank you. Moving on to 13, Mr. Gordon again, resolution 2024-03 stormwater fees.
And I'm gonna stand up here and continue. So, all right, good. Okay, so, in conjunction with the stormwater fee in lieu, which goes into the code, this is pertaining to our engineering standard. Chapter 4 is all about stormwater, as we referenced. And, we are making some changes, some updates to this chapter. So, why are we doing this? What is it we're changing and who does it affect, right? So really, why are we doing this? And so the overall reason we're doing this is our engineering standards need to be revamped, updated periodically to upgrade for, and improve, revise standards, references, new materials, et cetera, et cetera. Our current standard for chapter 4 in particular has quite a few holes in it. And that's because it was originally redone, revised multiple years ago. COVID hit, all sorts of things happened, and it was not fully revised and updated. In fact, some of our code that we actually have published, I shouldn't say code, excuse me, our standards on our published end in sort of a ... We have highlighted sections that don't really reference things. So it's an incomplete standard, incomplete, references that we need to clean up and clarify. We have quite a bit of contradictory language in there as well. Again, sort of an edifice of a first draft going and then publish and not having the opportunities to revisit that. Additionally, we do not have the stormwater fee in lieu language and guidance that we just discussed. That is absent. That needs to be incorporated. And lastly, we are working to streamline the process. I'll get in that a little bit more detail, but Councilwoman Kaup, you mentioned about kind of the different criteria, right? And so what we've done is we've revised, revamped where and how you need to address do the stormwater and what it takes. So a few things, as I mentioned earlier, with the stormwater fee in lieu, that is really just for detention aspects. We are asking for almost every project to have some sort of water quality. I'm not going to go through every line in here, but the gist of it is that we are asking for projects that are again between this, you look about, less than 200 square feet is really exempt from everything at the city. Those really small projects. Those projects that have 200 to 1,000 square feet, we're requiring a construction management plan. That's what CMP refers to, and that's another addition to this standard. And so what that document is that is requiring a homeowner to put together a relatively simple plan to describe to us how you're managing your project. How are you storing your materials, protecting for erosion control, dealing with parking. Includes a site plan, some very simple basic things, but it really requires a homeowner to kind of think about their project and how it is impacting the storm drain and then their neighbors. You can kind of go through and we kind of ratchet up the level of requirements as you move from a small project. You know, in ADU, for example, we want to make it relatively streamlined approach and really simple to get through that process, instead of the current system is really going into a really pretty in-depth analysis regardless of what you're doing. I'm going to go through the next one here. And again, this is a whole table where again, this is where we had a trigger for if you did interior work. And what we have it here is, you know, 50% or greater. Again, that is to get folks who are doing, you know, significant remodels to provide stormwater treatment on their site. Those are kind of the requirements. And so again, I kind of mentioned and talked about the construction management plan, but again, this is really a way of getting people to think about what they're doing and their impacts of their projects to stormwater and protect for erosion control. Again, talked about the stormwater fee in lieu. That was one of the major additions. And so the other thing, as I mentioned, is that streamline approach. So currently in our standards, we either require a minor or a major drainage analysis. Both require a fairly detailed analysis of what happens and what's going on. And we really think that projects less than 1,000 square feet are relatively simple. Again, these are your addition of a master bedroom, an ADU, a shed, that is not overly that complicated and generally speaking is not going to have major site impacts and therefore, you know, deserve sort of a more streamlined approach. Projects that have, you know, greater than 1,000 square feet, we are requiring them to do a more detailed analysis of their stormwater. How does it impact your neighbors? Are you have on-site flow? You know, delineate basins, these kind of things, and determine some more of the hardcore engineering analysis that we would require. Again, we're really trying to differentiate between very simple projects and more complicated projects. I'm going to leave it there and open it up for any questions that you guys may have on the update to the engineering standards.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Councillor Cow, please.
Just a quick clarification. So on that previous slide, when you say over 1,000 square feet, under 1,000 square feet, are you meaning of impervious area?
No, so this would be disturbance, right? So
So any ground disturbance.
yeah, if you rip out a whole yard, changing the drainage patterns, we'd want to see what your plans are to fix that. It is generally speaking driven by the impervious category.
Right.
But again, we are trying to be thoughtful on erosion control and what's getting into our storm system and eventually down to our rivers.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions? See none. Entertaining a motion in resolution 2014-03. And Councillor Cow, please.
Make a motion if I can find the right to make a motion. Okay, I move that we approve resolution 2024-03, adopting chapter 4, stormwater of the engineering standards.
Councillor Godus.
Second.
Thank you. We have motion and a second. Any more discussion? See none, we'll call for the question.
It passes 5-0.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you, Ryan. Moving on. Let's see, close out. Moving on, item 14, ordinance 2402, boards and commission term limits.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I apologize. I was just looking at this. For some reason, part of the very short staff report I put in got cut off, so it was a little more terse even than I usually am. We, a couple of years ago, in 2020, council's direction, we instituted a code change that strictly limited boards and commissions to 2 3-year terms with no exceptions. The mayor directed that we put a ordinance back on tonight that replaced the new language with the old language as it existed in 2020. This was driven by council, so I don't really have anything else to add.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Questions to legal? Councillor Godus, please.
So I'll just read it just for the sake of everybody. Unless it's deemed vital by the city council, that an appointed board member of a board or commission be retained in office, each member shall be replaced after having served for 6 years on a board or commission. However, nothing in the subsection shall be construed to prevent the appointment of a member to a new term where at the expiration of the current term, they will have served for less than 6 years. What's the second part of that mean?
So it means if you got appointed to fill in a term, say for a year,
I see.
and then you served a 3-year term, you could serve another 3-year term.
Right.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. And I believe just for context, this is not a question, but for context, the mayor spoke to me about this, probably talked to several other of you about this, but the concern is that we have a couple boards and commissions, or maybe just one, that has several pretty darn new members, and then several members have a lot of experience that are leaving. And so if they left, and we've had this with a few other boards and commissions in the past where we have like 3 people that are term limited that have to get off, a person is moving, and like somebody we just appointed is like the last person standing. And so I like, I'll just editorialize as well. I like that it's unless deemed vital. I think that sets a decent bar. So it's not just, it'd be uncomfortable to not reappoint this person again. They have to petition. We'd have to say, well, is it vital? So that's, I guess, the context I have with it.
All right, thank you. Councillor Cow, please.
So is this the language that was in there in 2020? This was the language. Oh, okay. Because I was just reading this kind of from the standpoint of how do you enforce this? And there were a couple of things that I have issue with. First of all, where it says, each member shall be replaced after having served for 6 years on a board. That could be mid-term, 6 years. So
Yeah, I mean, I had no, other than an email that said, put this together and put it on. I didn't have a lot of, like, I didn't tweak the language or spend a lot of time on it because it was essentially reverting to what was there.
okay,
If you guys would like to make changes to it between first and second reading, I'm happy to do that.
okay.
But I really didn't know exactly what you guys had in mind.
Well, that would be my first thing, was to say after having, I mean, if council wants to do that, after having served 6 years at the completion of their current term, at least
Yeah.
let them finish.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Godus.